To understand arithmetic with negative numbers, forget the idea that two negatives make a positive, if you've been taught that, and learn the words sum and product, which are useful for other topics too. The sum of a group of numbers is the result when you add them. So, the sum of 3 and 4 is 3 plus 4, or 7. The product of a group of numbers is the result when you multiply them. So, the product of 3 and 4 is 3 times 4, or 12. When you're comfortable with those two words, you can start learning the rules for arithmetic with negative numbers more easily. The sum of two negative numbers is always negative. For example, negative 40 plus negative 50 equals negative 90. The size of the result is always the sum of the sizes of the two numbers being added, but it's negative because the two numbers are negative. It's just like when you receive an energy bill for gas and electricity. If you owe £40 for gas and you owe £50 for electricity, each of those things is negative because you owe someone money. So when you receive a combined energy bill, it's also negative. They still want money from you, and the amount they want is the total of the two amounts for gas and electricity. Lots of students get calculations like these wrong because they've been taught the idea that two negatives make a positive, but it just isn't true as a general rule. If you're not sure, try the calculation on a calculator. If you add two negative numbers, you get a negative answer. The sum of one positive and one negative number depends on how large they are compared to each other. And again, we can connect this to our emotions, positive and negative feelings. As I look out of my window, for example, it's cold and it's snowing. For me, the cold is a negative thing, but the snow is positive. So how I feel is a mixture of those two emotional states. The result for me is that I feel positive overall because the positive feeling of seeing the snow outweighs the small negative feeling of the cold. This is how arithmetic with negative numbers works. If you add one positive number and one negative number, the sum will be positive if the size of the positive number is larger than the size of the negative number. So, for example, 20 plus negative 1 equals 19. The result will be smaller than the positive number because the negative number drags the total down. Just like for me, how the coldness makes a snowy day feel a little bit worse, but not enough to spoil my day and make it negative overall. Sometimes though, when you add one positive number and one negative number, the negative number will be bigger. So for example, in the calculation 3 plus negative 10, the sum is negative 7, because here the negative number outweighs the positive. This might be how I feel about the snow tomorrow, because after a day we might be left with icy paths which aren't much fun to walk on, so that's a negative, but some of the beauty of the snow will be lost as it starts to melt, so the positive feeling will be smaller as well. If there's a small positive feeling and a larger negative feeling, overall we feel negative. The other possibility in arithmetic is that we have a positive number and a negative number of the same size. In that case, when we add them, the sum will always be 0 as they cancel each other out. Again, it's similar to emotions. If something good happens and something equally bad happens, overall, with one dragging your mood up and the other dragging your mood down, you end up feeling neither positive nor negative. The product of one positive and one negative number is always negative. For example, 8 times negative 2 equals negative 16. Whenever I see a calculation like this, I always think of it as lots of something negative, in this case 8 lots. And anything negative that happens 8 times is just even more negative. 1 broken finger is bad, 8 broken fingers is even worse. Notice that negative 2 times 8 is the same thing as 8 times negative 2. The product of two negative numbers is always positive, but beware of saying two negatives make a positive, because although it's true in this case, if you remember that rule, you're likely to end up thinking that the sum of two negatives is positive as well, which isn't true. It's hard to think of the product of two negative numbers in terms of emotions, but you can still work out that the product of two negative numbers is positive by starting off with two positive numbers. For example, 5 times 6 is 30, so 5 times negative 6 can't be the same, it must be negative 30. Then negative 5 times negative 6 can't be the same again, so negative 5 times negative 6 becomes positive 30.
Subtracting a negative number is another example that mirrors very well what happens with our emotions. When we take away something negative in our lives, the result is that we feel more positive. But we have to be very careful to note that it's just more positive and not necessarily positive overall. If you start low enough, becoming more positive may mean less negative, but still not positive enough to be positive overall. If my house burnt down yesterday and I was homeless today, I'd be feeling pretty negative, especially because it's so cold outside. If you could take away the negative feeling of the cold, taking away that negative would make me feel more positive, but still not positive overall. It's like starting off at negative 100 and taking away negative 5. Taking away the negative 5 makes the result more positive than negative 100, or in other words less negative, but it's not enough to make the result positive overall. If the number we start with and the number we take away are the same, then the result we get is 0. Taking away a negative number is the same as adding the positive version of the number. So for example, negative 7 subtract negative 7 is the same as negative 7 plus 7, which means we get 0. If we start with a negative number and subtract a larger negative number, we end up with a positive result. This is a bit like having a slightly negative day and then having a big problem taken away. The problem is negative, and because it's been taken away, as long as you weren't having a really bad day to start with, you'll often find that taking the problem away improves your day so much that a negative day is turned into a positive one. That's what's happening when we calculate negative 4 subtract negative 8. The negative 8 is so negative compared to the negative 4 that when we take it away, it improves the situation enough to make the result positive overall. Subtracting negative 8 is the same as adding 8. Finally, if we start from a positive place, then taking away something negative in life always ends up with us just feeling even more positive. And again, that's true for arithmetic too. For example, if you start off at 5 and then subtract negative 10, that's like adding 10, and so you end up at 15. If you want more free content like this, available online whenever you need it, then subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon for notifications, like this video, and share it with other people who might find it useful.